All right, y'all. So, I just got done replacing the battery in my copy of Pokemon Yellow. This is my brother's copy of Pokemon Silver. He's had this one for years, but has not held a held a save in a very long time because the battery in here is probably dried out. Very common for these Game Boy Color cartridges. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pop it out of its case here. Gotta get that security bit out. And then what I'm gonna do to open these up, once you get that security bit out, you just slide it and it opens up. And then you can remove the faceplate. And then the cartridge will just pop right out of here. So what I'm gonna do before I desolder this battery is I'm gonna check with the multimeter to see how much voltage this battery is putting out right now. Game Boy batteries, Game Boy Color cartridge batteries should be putting out 3 volts. So if this thing's not putting out 3 volts, then it definitely is dried out and needs to be replaced. So I'm gonna go ahead and take my multimeter, negative to negative, positive to positive, and I'm getting almost no voltage across this thing here. Try this one more time. I got like literally 0. Yeah, pretty close. Pretty dry, 0.01, 0.015. So that thing is really dry. Definitely needs to be replaced. You can take a look here. The solder on these batteries is pretty terrible. It comes pretty bad out of the factory. I actually, when I opened this one up earlier to look at the quality of the state of the chip in there, of the cartridge, I noticed that some loose solder balls were just floating around inside of the case. So what I'm gonna do first is I'm gonna apply a good amount of flux and like a pretty good amount because it's a lot of old bad solder on here. And what I'm gonna do is I'm going to desolder this battery. It's gonna take me a second to do this with the desoldering wick. Where is my desoldering wick? My area is a mess right now. So I've got my iron here at probably just a little above 400, which is a little bit on the cool side for this, but I don't want to run too hot. And I'm going to take my wick and I'm going to suck up as much of that old solder as possible. Got a good amount of it off there. I'm gonna take some more of my wick. I like to trim my wick pretty often so that I'm always using some fresh, clean wick to pick up some solder. And I definitely, on these little boards, don't want to spread any solder anywhere on accident. I'm gonna get this side a little bit. There we go. And you can see that battery is already coming pretty loose. So what I can actually do to make this a little bit easier for me now is I can, before I finish taking off all this solder, I can get this battery out of there now. I can tell it wants to come out. Might need a little bit more flux to get that post out. Nope, got it. I'm gonna hold it out for a second so that that solder will cool and it won't reconnect. I'm gonna do the same on this side. That solder warm and lift that out. So I don't just want to leave this like in this state here with all of this old solder on it and all that old flux. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to desolder the rest of that solder that's on there, clean up these pads, and then I'm going to swap out this dry old battery with a brand new one. So give me a moment. I'm going to clean up these pads with some of my desolder wick. Yeah, I'm recording on my phone. You're going to see my hand sometime. Sorry. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to take this board. I'm going to elevate it a little bit. Easier for me to work on it like this. Really lightly clasp it. There we go. This is just going to hold it in place for me while I go through and continue desoldering on here. Cutting off some more wick over here. And now I'm gonna apply a little bit more flux onto these pads. And now let me do a little bit of desoldering here. Sorry if the angle is really tough. I'm trying to get it as decently as I can. Whoops. I'm gonna run my wick on there, soak up as much of that solder as possible. That's pretty good. Now, I'm not really gonna try to get every little bit of solder off, but I do want these pads pretty clean. That pad that I just worked on is looking pretty good to me already. All right, that is basically clean. I'm gonna hit that first pad again, and it should be good to go after this. And ready for the new battery. Alrighty, I'll show you all what it looks like now. Still a little bit of solder on those pads, but not enough that I'm gonna lose any sleep over. Now let me clean this up a little bit before I solder on the new pads. So I'm gonna take a little bit of isopropyl alcohol here, of a little bit, my broken little precision applicator here. So I'm gonna take some ISO, IPA, whatever you call it, wherever you are. I'm gonna apply some to a knitted, whatever these are called, these types of Q-tips here, like the knitted ends. So they're not all full of threads. And I'm gonna clean up some of that leftover flux on the board here. Definitely don't wanna leave all that behind. Flux is corrosive. So by cleaning all this up, it's gonna help this cart last a lot longer than it would have if I would have left it all full of this stuff. So trying to get it real nice and clean. Since this is isopropyl alcohol, it dries very, very quickly at room temperature. It's already starting to dry there. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna tin these pads with just a small amount of solder. That'll make them ready to accept the terminals on our battery a little bit easier. So I'm gonna put a little bit of flux. And I'm gonna take my leaded solder here. Pull out a good amount because I hate having to yank it later. And I'm gonna go ahead and quickly apply a little bit of solder here. I'm realizing now that this post is all in the way. So let me try moving this here. There we go. So I'm gonna apply solder to both of these pads here. There we go. And there we go. And you can tell the pads are properly tinned now. With some solder, you can see that shiny solder on there now, a little glob of it. Didn't want to put too much. And now, that sounds like a party out there. And now, I'm gonna go ahead and drop in a battery. Sorry, y'all. So here I have, oh, and I dropped it. Ah, darn it. So here I have a CR2025 batteries. Last 3 times as long as the stock batteries on these Game Boy cartridges, so you can game even longer without having to worry about replacing this battery. So what I'm gonna do is, here on the Game Boy cartridge, you can see, you can see down here the negative symbol, and up here, it's kind of hard to see it. There's a positive symbol. Let me clean this up just a tad more. I don't need it perfectly clean right now. Whoops. I don't need it perfectly cleaned right now because I'm gonna just be applying more flux here, but I might clean that up a little bit more real quick. So I'm just using a regular Q-tip for this now, since I've got most of the flux off already. Got a little bit of isopropyl alcohol on the end there. Alrighty. So now that the ISO is almost done drying, got a little bit of excess isopropyl on there, so I'm gonna the dry Q-tip swab some of that off of there. And now I'm gonna position the battery. So depending on the orientation of the battery, some places are gonna tell you that the positive side has to be facing up, but sometimes the brackets on these don't let you put the positive side facing up. So I found that it really doesn't matter as long as your brackets are properly oriented. It doesn't really matter which side is up or down. So what I'm gonna do is, since this side is marked as the positive side, that means this tab is the positive tab and this is the negative tab. So before I put this on, I always like to double check my batteries to make sure that they are reading the proper voltage so that I don't have to come back in here and take this off later. So I'll put negative to negative, positive to positive. Whoops. I'm getting 3.32 volts. So we're right in where we need to be, that 3-volt range. So that means that I can go ahead and solder this battery on. So positive to positive, negative to negative. So what I'm gonna do first is I'm just gonna put a little bit of flux down. And since all these pads are pre-tinned, what I can do is I can just apply a little bit of heat to stick these terminals down, and then I can go in and add a little bit more solder. So I'm gonna just take a little bit of heat, make sure these stay lined up. Heat that up for a moment so it connects. Heat it up for a moment over here so that it connects. And now I can go in and I can add a little bit more solder on the top to make sure that these are properly soldered in. Heat that back up a little bit. A little bit more solder on there. Heat it back up a little bit with a little bit of solder. There we go. And now I'm gonna go back in here, clean it up with some isopropyl alcohol again to get that extra flux off of there, and we'll test it out. I'm gonna hit a little bit more of the board with some ISO because there's a little bit of, I want to say oxidation on here, but I don't want to rub it too hard because Q-tips are abrasive, especially to some sensitive electronic components. So I'm gonna give this a moment to let it dry, and then I'll come back and plug it into the Game Boy. Excuse me. I'll come back and I'll plug it into the Game Boy, and we'll see how well it works out. Alrighty, so I just went through and I started up the game and just made it far enough to be able to make a save. So let's see. And there we go. I've got a save. And so the cartridge is working now. Alright, y'all. I messed up in the video here, so I'm going back in. We all make mistakes. We're all human. I was talking about soldering this battery in the proper orientation, and then I did it backwards. No harm, no foul. Even if you were to start the Game Boy up with the cartridge and the battery backwards like this, it wouldn't cause any harm to the game or to the Game Boy. You just still wouldn't get any saves. So that's obviously not what we want. So I'm gonna get my more fine-tipped tweezers here. Get under that battery a little bit, and I'm gonna lift these up just like I did earlier. There we go. And now I need to flip this around because I had the negative terminal on the positive side. This is positive. This is positive here. I had it backwards. So let me go in and line this stuff back up. That solder kind of globbed up funny there. So I'm going to hold it here. Oops. Hit it with a little bit of heat. Boom, we're in. Hit it with some heat. Boom. We're in. And now that's soldered in correctly. And now I'm gonna go ahead, clean this up a little bit more again, and get this plugged into a Game Boy to try out. I'll leave the recording going while I get this thing cleaned up and put back together. Okay, looking good. Looking good. I'll double check for voltage, just in case. You really don't have to do this part if you already know your battery's good, but we do what we do. Perfect. Perfect, 3 volts. Awesome. So now I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna take our shell, and I'm gonna drop the cartridge, drop the cartridge back in there. Take our top half, line it up just slightly below, it'll click into place, slide it up, and then we can resecure the security bit. Here on the end, oops, don't want it too tight. Might have been a little too tight. I don't want it too loose either though. And I'm gonna go try this out now.